The FBI spent 43 days trying to unlock a device that had already witnessed the entire crime. It was not a security camera, not a phone, not a hidden microphone buried somewhere inside Nancy Guthrie's house. It was the small medical implant resting beneath her collarbone, a Medtronic pacemaker programmed to monitor her heart every second she was alive. The device tracked pulse rhythm, physical movement, body position, stress spikes, and sudden changes in cardiovascular activity. Every movement Nancy made during the final minutes inside her Catalina Foothills home was preserved inside encrypted telemetry logs investigators could not immediately access. For weeks, federal agents knew the answers existed somewhere inside that data. They just could not read it. Then on March 14th, everything changed. The FBI confirmed that technicians had finally completed the decryption process. What emerged from the pacemaker records did not simply support the investigation. It rewrote the timeline completely. Investigators now believe the entire abduction unfolded in less than 10 minutes. Tucson, Arizona, January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had lived alone in the same desert home for decades after the death of her husband Charles, a mining engineer killed during an expedition in Mexico. Friends described her as intelligent, independent, and deeply routine-oriented despite worsening mobility issues connected to a chronic heart condition. Her pacemaker automatically transmitted diagnostic reports through an app connected to her phone every 24 hours. That system was designed to alert doctors during a medical emergency. Instead, it captured the physiological signature of a violent encounter inside her home. At 9:50 that evening, Nancy returned home after dinner with family. Hours later, her Nest doorbell camera disconnected. Minutes after that, the pacemaker recorded a massive cardiac spike consistent with acute fear. And from that moment forward, Nancy Guthrie vanished. Investigators already had the timestamps. What they did not have was context. The Nest camera disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. The pacemaker signal disappeared at 2:28. Somewhere between those two moments, Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home without a witness, without a scream heard by neighbors, and without a single confirmed sighting afterward. For more than a month, detectives believed the critical events inside the house were lost forever. Then the decrypted pacemaker telemetry changed everything. According to sources familiar with the federal analysis, the device recorded uninterrupted cardiac activity beginning shortly after Nancy returned home that evening. Between 10:11 at night and approximately 1:37 in the morning, her heart rate remained stable between 60 and 64 beats per minute. The accelerometer embedded inside the pacemaker showed almost no physical movement during that period. She was resting. She was likely asleep. At 1:38, the pattern changes. Nancy's heart rate accelerated sharply from 64 to 109 beats per minute in under 2 minutes. Medical analysts assisting the FBI reportedly described the spike as highly abnormal for someone waking naturally from sleep. The telemetry showed an abrupt elevation consistent with acute fear or sudden confrontation. Seconds later, the device recorded a shift from a horizontal resting position to an upright posture. Nancy sat up. Then the movement began. At 1:40, the accelerometer registered repeated directional changes moving away from the bedroom area. By 1:42, her pulse climbed to 128 beats per minute. Investigators believe she was moving through the hallway while under severe distress. One source close to the investigation told reporters that the telemetry resembled what trauma physicians observe in patients experiencing immediate survival panic. At 1:44, the data becomes even more alarming. Nancy's heart rate crossed 140 beats per minute. The movement logs showed rapid lateral motion followed by a sudden stop lasting several seconds. Analysts believe that pause may represent the moment physical contact occurred between Nancy and the suspect. The possibility that she fell was reportedly considered but later deprioritized because the telemetry did not show the body orientation shift normally associated with a collapse. At 1:47, the Nest doorbell camera disconnected from the network. Federal investigators now believe that timestamp was not incidental. It occurred directly inside the same 3-minute window where Nancy's cardiac activity reached its highest recorded level of the night. The synchronization between the physiological spike and the camera failure suggested coordination. Someone inside or immediately outside the property intentionally disabled surveillance while Nancy was still conscious. Then at 1:49, movement stopped completely. The pacemaker continued transmitting heart activity, but the accelerometer registered no meaningful motion afterward. Nancy's pulse gradually declined from 143 beats per minute to 91 over the next half hour. She remained alive, but according to investigators, she was no longer moving independently. The entire confrontation inside the house may have lasted less than 10 minutes. The new timeline forced investigators to reinterpret evidence they believed they already understood. For weeks, the masked figure captured near Nancy Guthrie's front porch at approximately 2:12 in the morning had been viewed as a possible arrival. But once the pacemaker data established that Nancy had likely been subdued by 1:49, detectives began considering a different possibility entirely. The individual on camera may not have been entering the property. They may have been leaving it. That shift changed the meaning of every visible detail. The figure appeared dressed in dark clothing with a ski mask partially obscuring the face. Investigators noted the presence of a backpack and what appeared to be a holstered handgun positioned near the waistline. Initially, analysts believed those items indicated preparation. Now they suspect the event itself may have already occurred before the footage was captured. According to sources close to the investigation, forensic specialists enhanced several frames recovered from Google's back-end storage systems after the original camera feed became corrupted. The enhanced images reportedly revealed the suspect pausing briefly near the driveway before moving out of frame toward the road. Investigators are now examining whether the pause represented communication with a second individual waiting nearby in a vehicle. The possibility of multiple suspects has become increasingly difficult to dismiss. Former FBI profiler Jim Clementi told reporters that disabling the exterior camera while simultaneously controlling an elderly victim inside the house would require extraordinary speed if performed by a single offender. Either the suspect moved with precise planning and familiarity with the property, or another individual assisted during the abduction. Investigators have not publicly endorsed either theory, but sources indicate both remain active lines of inquiry. The DNA evidence has only intensified those questions. On March 14th, federal authorities quietly confirmed that male DNA recovered from black gloves discovered near a drainage area outside the Catalina Foothills had produced a breakthrough through investigative genetic genealogy. Because the profile did not exist inside Cody's, analysts traced the sample through distant family line associations built from publicly accessible ancestry databases. That process reportedly narrowed the field to a small number of individuals connected to southern Arizona. One name immediately drew investigative attention. The individual reportedly lives less than 30 minutes from Nancy's home and has no violent criminal history. Detectives began covert surveillance shortly after the genealogical connection was identified. Law enforcement sources told multiple outlets that investigators later conducted what is commonly called a trash pull, collecting discarded material from outside the person's residence to obtain confirmatory DNA without alerting the subject. Those laboratory comparisons are believed to be ongoing. Sheriff Chris Nanos refused to confirm details surrounding the genealogy match but acknowledged publicly that the investigation had entered what he described as a decisive phase. When asked whether an arrest was approaching, he responded that investigators intended to move only when every forensic element aligned completely. Behind the scenes, federal analysts continued rebuilding the final minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's house almost second by second. The deeper investigators examined the timeline, the more the crime appeared planned long before the night Nancy disappeared. Her Catalina Foothills property sits in a quiet desert area surrounded by uneven terrain, cactus growth, and minimal lighting. The nearest neighboring homes are separated by large stretches of land. After midnight, the entire area becomes almost completely silent. Detectives now believe the suspect understood those conditions in advance. Nancy's home contained several possible entry points. The front entrance faced the driveway, but investigators also identified a sliding rear patio door, garage access, and multiple ground-level windows partially shielded from view by desert landscaping. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed weeks earlier that signs of forced entry had been discovered somewhere on the property, though officials have never publicly identified the exact breach location. That omission may be intentional. According to former Secret Service agent Jonathan Wackrow, withholding the entry point would allow investigators to verify future confessions or statements against unreleased crime scene details. But he also noted that the 10-minute operational window suggested familiarity impossible for a random intruder. Someone knew where cameras were positioned. Someone understood how quickly they needed to act before neighbors or passing traffic could notice movement near the house. Digital evidence appears to support that theory. Investigators reportedly obtained search records showing repeated online queries connected to Nancy Guthrie's address in the weeks before the kidnapping. Analysts are examining whether those searches originated from devices associated with the current person of interest or someone connected to them. Authorities are also reviewing cell tower data covering the Catalina Foothills area during the nights leading up to the abduction, searching for recurring devices appearing near Nancy's property after dark. But the central question remains unanswered. Where is Nancy Guthrie? The Pacemaker telemetry confirmed she was alive at 2:28 in the morning, when the device finally lost communication with her phone. After that point, the signal disappeared entirely. No hospital has reported contact with the serial number attached to her implant. No financial activity has surfaced. No verified sightings have been confirmed despite nationwide media coverage and a $100,000 reward. Nancy required daily heart medication and had significant mobility limitations. Investigators believe transporting her would have required physical assistance and likely a waiting vehicle positioned near the property. Yet no neighbor reported hearing an engine, seeing headlights, or observing unusual movement during the critical window. Then there is the final, unresolved question investigators continue circling back toward. Was the masked figure captured outside Nancy's house the same individual connected to the DNA recovered from the gloves? The FBI believes the genealogy evidence may identify the first real suspect in the case. Sheriff Nanos says developments could accelerate rapidly. Nancy's family continues insisting they believe she is still alive. And somewhere beyond the desert roads surrounding Tucson, investigators believe someone already knows exactly what happened during those missing 10 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home. If you know anything about the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, contact the FBI immediately at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Investigators believe the case is approaching a critical breakthrough. Subscribe now, because the moment an arrest happens in this investigation, everything is going to change overnight.